Alright, so we're going to look over the path distortion tools. So this is a set of tools that lies right over here, and they're a set of tools that allow you to adjust your stroked paths and give different kind of effects and modification to those paths, specifically with line thickness and fidelity. So the main one we're going to look at right now is the width tool. This is a really awesome tool that, again, like the stroke profiles, allows you to give it a nice hand-drawn look and a finer quality to your strokes that you just can't get using the stroke panel. So let's go ahead and look at that. So I'm going to go ahead and get my line width tool. It's right over here. I can also hit Shift and W, and you're going to get an arrow with a small tilde next to it. That's showing you you're ready to modify a path. I'll zoom in on some of these paths over here, and the way this works is you hover over a path and it'll highlight that path, and then if you start to click and drag, you can actually modify in real time the thickness of the path. And I can put these thickness points almost anywhere along this path, and I'm changing the profile, and I'm changing it in ways that you just could not do with the standard stroke profiles that we have. I can even taper the end, so I can get all the way to this end point, pull out and then pull in. I'll come over here to this side, hover next to the point, I'll pull out and then in, and then when I'm done, I'll hit Command and click. And I'll zoom out a little bit. I'll hit the V key. Alright, so that's essentially how you use this tool. Let's get a little bit more in depth with some of the other options that this tool has. Now, instead of clicking and dragging, if I actually double click on that line, it's going to bring up this width point edit. So it's going to ask me some questions on what I want to do with this stroke. So if I wanted to, I could come in here and I could adjust the total width of the stroke. I could actually adjust each individual side as well. So if I say I want one side to be smaller, you can see that reflects right over here. This one side got smaller and side one, which is the top, got larger. I could go the other way too. I could keep these linked so that as I increase and decrease the side, they stay together. And so that's kind of another advantage of using this tool, is you have some very accurate fine point adjustments that you can do with this. I'll go ahead and make kind of an asymmetrical width on this profile. So I'll make this side 2 big and side 1 small. The computer is still reading just a straight path, but the profile it is setting for this path is now so much different. Let's do one more. Let's make this one a little bit more simple. So I'm going to taper in this side. I'll click and drag and pull this side out. I'll pull in this part a little bit, and I'll just set this point here, and then I'll finally come to this end. Now when you do the endpoints, I find it's easier if you click and start to drag out before you pull them all the way in. I'll hit the V for the black arrow and select that line, and I could actually come up here to my control panel and I could click this icon right here. It says add to profiles. So I'll click that and I can name it Nix Profile 1, and now I have that profile loaded. So now if I were to make an individual path, I could select it and then I could apply my custom profile width to that line. It's hard to see at this thickness, so I'll increase it. We can see it's doing the same thing. It's tapering it. It's a little wide on the ends and a little narrow in the middle. I'll go ahead and delete that. So let's get in a little bit of practice. What I want you guys to do is try to recreate this style of line work using just these paths here. And we're just going to do that using the width profile tool. So I'll hit Shift W, and the first thing I want to do is I want to thicken the base. So I'll just set these points. And sometimes it's good to just set the width, because as you start to adjust other points, if you don't have a point that's already set, it'll sometimes give you an effect that is hard to go back and change. So sometimes I just come up and I just double click and then click OK, and that sets the width. So if I come in here and I start to make this thinner, this will stay at its thickness. So let's say I want to change this width point. I could get out my zoom tool and zoom in on that part of the path. I could go back to my width tool and I could go ahead and readjust this point. I could pull it down, or I could reset that width. I'll go ahead and zoom out, and I'll keep modifying this. Shift W, and I'll set the width on this part. I'll double click and click OK, and I'll set the width all the way in on that point. I'll thicken up this part, and then I'll narrow down some of these parts. I'll double click this point because I want to keep that set, but I will narrow this down all the way. I'll go ahead and widen this part of the ellipse. I'll widen this part too. And then I'll make this part more narrow. Do the same thing over here. Make this part just a little bit wider, and I'll set this point, double click, okay, and I'll make this inside line. I'll zoom in, and I'll make this inside line nice and thin. And do the same thing over here. I'll double click this side and set that width, double click this side and set that width, and I will narrow down that point. You can see the overall effect is we are accentuating parts of the curve that really give it more life. Let's thicken up this part a little bit so it matches. I'll come over here to the handle, thicken up this part, and then as it curves around, I'm going to make that a little bit thinner, and as it comes back, I'll make it a little bit thicker again. I'll do the same thing down here, make this a little bit thicker, and as it comes into here, that looks good. I'll thicken up this portion, bring this in just a little bit, and then I'll bring this endpoint in completely. So see, we get that nice tapered look. I'll do it one more time. This time I'll just double click this line, click OK, and I will pull this endpoint all the way in. And then maybe I'll thicken up this other line that I adjusted here, make it just a little bit thicker. Zoom out. And that looks a lot more interesting than what we had before. So while we're here, we're just going to explore some of the other ones. And to be frank, I haven't really had a lot of success with using these in a more practical manner, but we'll just go through them anyways. So these ones are going to give it more of a randomized or like a chaotic aesthetic. So we'll just go over here to the width tool. We'll click and hold, and let's choose this first one, the warp tool. As I float over a path and hold down on the mouse, it's going to start warping the path. I can start pulling this around in some pretty unique ways. So I'm basically pushing and pulling the line. Alright, pretty cool. Let's go to the next one. Let's try the twirl. So I'll come over here to this end. And wow, if I click and hold down, it starts to twirl the line. It's like we're making little waves. You got to be careful what lies within the diameter. To change the diameter, if I double click on the twirl tool, I can actually set the diameter that affects the paths. You can choose the angle and how intense that it gets with twirling it. You can see that's a little bit smaller. Alright, pretty cool. Let's go to the next one, the pucker tool. So the pucker tool is actually going to either suck in or pull out your paths. If I bring this down and I bring this up and then I go right into the center, it puckers it in. Pull that up and pull this down, and you can see it sucks it into the center. Try the other one, the bloat. Now it's going to start pushing things away. If I go here in the center, you can see it likes to push things out. Alright, let's try the other one, the scallop tool. This one's going to create little scalloped waves. Let's go ahead and adjust this tool a little bit. So I'll double click on that, and let's increase the intensity. And I'm going to go ahead and increase the complexity and the detail and see what it does. Wow. That looks like it's a little too much. I'll double click that. I'll bring down complexity, bring down detail. See what it does to this one. Alright, interesting. Let's try the crystallize. There we go. So this one's going to put little spikes on the end. And then the last one, the wrinkle tool. This one I find can be really useful. I want just a nice randomized look to my line. I can use the wrinkle tool. So I might use a combination. I might come over with a wrinkle. The longer I kind of hold down on it, the bigger the wrinkles get. And after that, I might come in with my warp tool, start to push these around. Again, we're going for the look of random and chaotic. Alright, so that's an overview of using those path distortion tools.